Well, today I'm very pleased to be joined by Guloran Turan from the Global CCS Institute. Guloran, perhaps you could give a little bit of flavour as to your background in terms of decarbonisation and also a little about the Global CCS Institute.
Thanks very much, Alex, and it's a big pleasure to be here with you today. My name is Guloran Turan, and I'm the General Manager of Advocacy at the Global CCS Institute. The Institute was founded in 2009, originally by the Australian government, but we are an independent body, non-profit. We're an international think tank that aims to accelerate the deployment of carbon capture and storage as a key climate mitigation technology. And we do that through three ways. First, through our advocacy, we build support. Then, through our intelligent efforts, we seek to build and disseminate knowledge. And through our membership, we seek to build community. We're a membership organization. We have close to 80 members, businesses, governments, and NGOs. Amongst the governments, I mentioned the Australian government is a founding member, but we also have the governments of China, Japan, US, and UK. We've got big corporates like BP and Shell. We've got small technology providers and NGOs, as I mentioned, amongst our membership. I joined the Institute 2 years ago. I have a career in the energy industry, close to 15 years. I was with the BG Group, a UK-based natural gas major, which was taken over by Shell. I was their first head of climate change strategy. So I've been in the climate and sustainability and energy space for quite a while. And I'm very pleased to have joined the Institute to help the Institute, as I said, try to increase support for CCS around the world.
So the day-to-day work of the Institute, what sorts of things would be, a given focus in any week, just to sort of clarify that?
Of course. So as I mentioned, we work on increasing intelligence. So we release thought leadership reports, and our flagship report is called the Global Status of CCS, which gets released every year. And in the past, it got released during the COP conferences. Given that this year's COP is postponed to 2021, we're still going to release the report on the 1st of December. And then the report aims to capture all the developments around the world that are related to CCS, from investments to policy and technology. Particularly after following the pandemic, we started to do a lot of webinars, and that's enabled us to reach larger audiences than we did in the past. Before the pandemic, we used to hold a lot of events around the world with our exclusive to our membership as well as open to public, but the webinars are now enabling us to reach, as I said, to much bigger audiences. In September, we released a paper together with Columbia University on net zero and the role of CCS in reaching net zero. And we released that report during New York Climate Week. And our online event, attracted more than 1,000 participants, which I think is fantastic. We also provide input into various government consultations, and we try to become trusted partners to policymakers and advise them as requested on, assessing pros and cons of various different policy options, as well as technological improvements regarding CCS.
Thank you. That's a really good background for the conversation. Now, we have picked on a theme which is about how to get CCUS to commercial scale. And anyone that has listened to some of the other podcasts that we've done in this series will know that this kind of whole thing of how do we get commercial scale technology to solve the kind of big complex problems of industry. It's not just limited to CCUS. Obviously, it's a similar challenge for other types of technology as well. But today we're focusing in on CCUS, sorry. So one of the kind of the starting points that I thought we would kick off with is this whole idea at the moment of, the Green Deal in Europe and various other initiatives around the world to build back better post-COVID. What are your thoughts on that? What measures do you think are needed to help us get to a more resilient system? And more specifically, are there measures that you're aware of in any of those deals that really speak to supporting and ramping up CCUS?
Indeed. The pandemic and the following economic downturn have been devastating. And if there is any silver lining to all that we're going through, at the moment. I think it's the fact that it gives us probably in a century, once in a lifetime opportunity to build back, as you say, a better system, a system that's more resilient, that's more inclusive, and of course, low in carbon. I think what's different this time around compared to the global financial crisis of, say, a decade, 12 years ago, is that now I think policymakers understand, we now know that economic recovery does not have to be divorced from sustainable environmental and climate-friendly policies. That used to be the conventional wisdom. It's no longer, thankfully. And indeed, compared to the global financial crisis, we see a more different approach from governments. In fact, within only the past 2 years, past 2 weeks, we've seen China, Japan, and South Korea commit to net zero targets, which I think is fantastic. You mentioned the Green New Deal. In fact, EU reiterated its commitment to the Green New Deal and its recovery package. The Next Generation EU has many climate-friendly and just transition-focused measures. From the point of CCUS, I'm happy to report that CCUS is also having a role in these packages. A stellar example is the Norwegian government, which actually brought forward its decision on the Norway full chain project. It was supposed to make a decision on it in 2020, first quarter of 2021, but it brought it forward, and in September it announced that it was going to give a green light to the project, and in fact it would be investing sort of up to €1 billion, I think €1.5 billion euros into the project, which is renamed Longship. And the project is going to be, this is the CCS project, transport storage project in Norway, initially to capture from 2 facilities in Norway, a cement and a waste energy plant, and in later stages it's aiming to capture CO2 from other industrial sources in Europe. So it's very much a European decarbonization project, and it's one that's going to create jobs in Norway. It's estimated to create some 3,000 jobs during construction. I think, again, one of the aspects of CCS that's better understood now is the fact that it can create job creation, it can help with just transition. Similarly, when we look at where I'm based, in the UK, the government proposed £800 million for CCUS infrastructure in the spring budget, and a few days later, the Prime Minister has said that the government will invest around £100 million in order to scale up direct air capture innovation, accelerate innovation in direct air capture. So I think we are seeing governments support CCS within the context of the economic recovery packages in key jurisdictions.
So let me just ask a couple of questions about those, because those, the Longship project interests me a lot, because am I right? I'm just hoping I'm making the right connection here. This is where they are putting a lot of funding into the Norcem project, which is Heidelberg Cement. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And is it linked into, apologies to my listeners, I should probably know this, but is it linked to the Northern Lights project as well?
Exactly. So Northern Lights is the transport and storage infrastructure, and that's led by Equinor, Total, and Shell. And Norcem is one of the plants that's going to be the cement plant that's going to be capturing CO2 from in Norway. And there's also the Oslo waste to energy plant that's aiming to capture CO2. So those will be the first 2 anchor capture projects that will send CO2 into this infrastructure, but it's scaled up so that it, in the future phases, it can, as I said, receive emissions from all over from Europe. And there are a number of MOUs already that have been signed with companies, a number of companies across Europe, in places like Sweden, for example.
Okay, interesting. And then on the UK stat that you mentioned, which is that £800 million investment, sometimes I get a little overexcited about numbers, but then you have to stop and pause for a moment. What sort of projects or what sort of result would you expect for that investment? Because obviously they're not claiming they're going to fund all CCUS everywhere in the UK. So what should we get that £800 million, do you think?
So the government in the spring budget announced that they would like to see two CCS clusters, hub and clusters, become operational in sort of mid-2020s and onwards. And this is very much of an infrastructure fund. So whilst the government is not going to be taking on all the investment, I think it's aiming to help create the infrastructure, the transport and storage infrastructure to enable these hubs and clusters kind of come about. And that's one of the things that we're seeing recently, the sort of hub and cluster model that enables industrial decarbonization of places like Teesside and Humber, etc., which obviously account for quite a bit of UK emissions, but also account quite a bit for UK's industry as well. So the government is hoping to be able to decarbonize these industrial hubs through the use of CCUS.
Okay, so that investment kind of covers that early stage of getting the consortia up and running, or it kind of contributes to the FEED study or things like that.
Exactly.
Okay, well, before we get much further with CCUS, I think somewhere out in the universe there are a lot of climate warriors who are still fairly enraged.
Gosh, I think I know where this question is going to.
Yeah, so the big criticism, and actually it's not even a criticism, sometimes it's a question. So, friends of mine, or people I'm connected to who are not in this sector, not focused on decarbonisation, often when I talk about the work that I do or the people I'm involved with, one of their first questions will be, "Oh, but isn't isn't that just a bit of a fig leaf for the oil and gas companies?" So, you clearly your career would say otherwise, but let's hear from you on kind of what's your thought on that criticism. It's that it's either a fig leaf, or that it's expensive, or that it's not yet proven enough to be part of our forward plans. These are all big criticisms for any technology to battle. So just give me your perspective on that, and what should we consider when we're thinking about those things?
Sure. I can see where the view is coming from, but as I said, given my career and knowledge of the space, I think it's unfair. And I'm saying this because a number of things. CCS has been around since the 1970s, and today we have 20 large industrial scale facilities operating. Since the 1970s to date, more than 260 million tons of CO2 has been captured and safely stored underground. And just to give a sense to our listeners, a passenger car sort of emits, give or take, roughly 5 tons of CO2 per annum. So 260 million tons of CO2 is a lot of passenger cars off the roads. That's a lot of decarbonization. I think what most people don't realize is that, and probably are not aware of, is the fact that 19 of these 20 existing operational facilities are in industrial applications, and some, almost like half of them, are in natural gas processing, where cost of capturing CO2 is much lower, say, compared to power generation, because there is a much more concentrated CO2 stream, and actually separating the CO2 out is part of the process itself. I think so. CCS is not. People were expecting CCS to be an application, decarbonization option for power generation, but at the moment it's a lot, actually, much more used in industrial applications. And also, when it comes to costs, let's not forget that costs do come down with further deployment through economies of scale and learning by doing. So, CCS, what I would like to get across is that CCS it's not a new technology. It's been around for a long time. It's been operating successfully, and it's applicable to a number of industries. It's not just power generation, which I suspect what the people were expecting to see.
There are different types of hard to abate sectors that are starting to find ways of kind of, I suppose, creating more affordable projects. So we had Carbon Clean Solutions
Exactly.
on the podcast a little while ago, and obviously Anna Ruda there, his point is that there's the opportunity for more modular types of technology that can make it more affordable and easier for people to integrate. So there are some different opportunities emerging there. Which of those which of those kind of criticisms would you say is the most persistent? What do you think that the industry around CCUS still really has to prove itself on? Is it the expense, or is it the scalability? Or it doesn't sound like it's the scalability, but is it, what do you think is the kind of the challenge that the industry still needs?
I think the comments generally tend to continue being, oh, it's unproven and it's expensive, etc. And I love this saying that goes, nothing breeds success like success. So I think we need to have more projects up and running across different applications of CCS, and I think that's going to be, the proof to all the skeptics that CCS is scalable. The costs can come down, and the costs, as I mentioned, differ across different applications of CCS. Gas processing, a cheaper application, power generation a bit more expensive, cement can be a bit more expensive, but then in some industries like cement and steel and hard to abate industry, we don't have any other options available today for large scale decarbonization. What perhaps again some people don't realize is that cement, for example, is accountable for some 7 or 8% of global CO2 emissions, yet it's not an industry that we can use we can't decarbonize, but just using renewable electricity, because almost 2/3 of the emissions in cement production just come from a chemical reaction using limestone that releases CO2. So capturing and storing CO2 is the only way we can deeply decarbonize cement. So number of applications, and the more we scale up CCUS, I think the more we're going to understand that we're going to see that costs come down, and the criticisms or the perception that it's unproven will, I think, kind of just die away with that.
Okay, well, so you've already mentioned that one of the kind of perceptions of this technology is that it's new, and therefore in the newness there's a challenge.
Indeed. When I used to be with the BG Group as the head of climate change strategy, some 10 years ago or so, CCS was very much seen as a technology for decarbonizing mainly coal-fired power generation. And since then, I think the landscape has changed significantly. There was the global financial crisis, but also let's remember that costs of renewables came down dramatically. Solar, 90%, wind kind of significantly, etc. And coal is very much on the way out, particularly in Europe, and when we look at sort of in Europe and the UK. Now, what's also changed about CCS is that the IPCC report came out, 1.5 report came out, so we now know that we conclusively need CCS. I think that's one of the kind of drivers, but we also understand, I think, the versatility of CCS better and more. So now we're looking to utilize CCS to decarbonize gas-fired generation in the UK, for example, also in North America, arguably, which is much more relevant. But we're also sort of looking at CCS as a technology to decarbonize hard to abate industry. We talked about cement, and looking again at Europe, we can use CCS in order to produce low carbon clean hydrogen, which can then further be used to decarbonize home heating, transport, etc. And then we know that we are going to need carbon capture and storage, coupled with bioenergy or through direct air capture, in order to remove CO2 from the atmosphere. So we've got the natural-based solutions to be able to do that, but we'll also need technology-based solutions such as CCS to be able to do that. So I think it's the versatility of CCS is much better understood, as well as the science that says we are going to have to do this, and the governments with their commitments to net zero, I think, are very much aware of this as well.
I'm definitely guilty of, I tend to sort of, in my head, and sometimes when I talk about it, I tend to sort of give the impression that CCUS, or CCS rather, is one technology type, like it is one type of box that sits on the side of a plant. For both industrials or investors that might be listening, is there a way of kind of just clarifying in easy terms what is the landscape for CCUS, and what's important, do you think, for people to understand about the different types of technologies involved?
So when it comes to direct air capture and some of the more recent emerging technologies, I'd like to say that it's not a case of either or, but it's a case of and. And I'm saying this because the IEA released its 2020 World Energy Outlook, I think a week or two ago. And if you look at the report, half of the emission reductions that are needed to reach net zero by 2050 are to come from technologies which they consider not commercially mature at the moment, and direct air capture would be one of them. As I said, it's one of those technologies together with bioenergy that would enable us to remove CO2 from the atmosphere, and IPCC says we need that. So in order to, I think, ensure that these technologies are deployed in time, we need to start investing in innovation today. So there are more commercially mature applications of CCS. We talked about, for example, gas processing, fertilizer, ethanol production, but there are also emerging applications such as direct air capture. And we can't say, let's forget about this and let's focus on that. We'll need the whole suite of options, and so we need to go and on all fronts.
So are there broad categories that you can define within CCS then, just for a kind of imagine, well, I'm a layman, but imagine there are more laymen out there. What if we're looking at carbon capture technology as one big group, how might we subdivide it? So direct air capture is one easy subdivision, I think. What other kind of subdivisions are there that are useful to understand, based on the type of technology, perhaps?
So similar to direct air capture, there's bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. And again, I'm putting that into the sort of the direct air capture bucket, because those two are considered to be carbon dioxide removal technologies, basically removing CO2 from the atmosphere. Bioenergy is using of crops that are then kind of, because they remove CO2 as they're growing from the atmosphere, and then when they're used, sort of, for example, burned in a power plant, then the emissions are captured and stored, therefore leading to negative emissions. So that's one group of technologies. So CCUS can also be used from large emission sources. So we could use CCUS from power plants. We mentioned coal and gas-fired power generation. We can use CCUS in terms of capturing CO2 from hard-to-abate industry. And in that category, we could put cement and steel and chemicals. We can talk about other industrial applications such as gas processing.
And are those largely, sorry, is that where I know the membrane technology, which is, I don't know why I'm so obsessed over that particular one. I think it's just because we have at the festival in January, we have Tupras speaking, and they're currently demonstrating the MOF for air. That just happens to have stuck in my brain as membrane technology that they're testing. But is that, when we're talking about CCUS in kind of industry, is that that's not the only type of CCUS, is it?
No, there are kind of like, for example, the most commonly used technology is what's called amine-based technology, which basically CO2 sticks to, and then it's heated and CO2 is there for release. So it's a capture technology. There are also kind of investments going into innovating that technology as well, to reduce the energy requirement of the technology, etc. So there are a number of different innovations happening, such as the sort of having it smaller scale, etc. So lots going on in the CCS front.
Let's sort of talk about that then. So there's lots going on, lots of different types of technologies. There are obviously examples of things at scale that are already in operation, and a whole host of innovations coming up through the development pipeline. So what's going to tip the investment kind of balance around CCUS? What's going to make it investable at scale? So we are seeing, obviously, venture capital, corporate venture, and others investing in it. What do you think needs to happen to tip this into something that larger scale investors can really feel comfortable about putting money into?
I think I see two trends happening side by side. One of them is ambition, and with that I mean governments and corporates raising ambition and committing to decarbonisation, committing to net zero targets. We have now, I think, more than 100 countries and governments and cities around the world committed to getting to net zero. We have corporates, we have energy companies, we've got cement companies that have committed to net zero targets. We have likes of Microsoft that's committed to not only becoming carbon negative by 2030, but also to remove all its historic emissions by 2050. So if we are to do this, we cannot do it without CCUS, and I think that recognition is being understood. Together with that, we're also seeing the creation of an investable, fit for purpose business model and investment environment for CCS. We're seeing clever government policy. We're seeing, business models that are financeable. We briefly discussed, for example, the creation of hubs and clusters. In the past, CCUS used to be very much of a, point A to point B, one plant, one storage site type of an operation. Now we're looking at industrial clusters where a number of emitters can utilize a shared transport and storage infrastructure, and governments putting in place not just kind of investment in economic recovery plans, but governments also putting in place policies that can kind of make the business case for CCS. So for example, in the UK for power generation with CCS, we're kind of seeing contract for differences being explored as a way of to remunerate CCS. So we're seeing governments and businesses work hand in hand, public partnerships, to also create the business models. And when we think about, for example, hub and clusters, it's a model that works because it both reduces risks and it reduces costs as well, because one can scale it up. And we're seeing increased interest from financiers into CCS because of this emergence of the business model that's backed by supportive policy.
Okay, well, that very neatly the policy brings me to my next point. So I think when you and I got in touch to talk about doing this podcast, I had said, could I ask you about your views on a fixed global price on carbon? And you didn't recoil in horror, but you did sort of look like, well, we can talk about it, but I don't. It's not really something that the Institute advocates for. And plus, of all the things I could bring to the table, it would be the hardest to actually make happen anyway. So if we move that to one side, I know there has been interest from some industrials about that, because obviously if you've got global operations, you'd much rather have a fixed point of measurement. But so if not that, then what? What is it that's going to work from that sort of both incentive slash the carrot and the stick side for industrials, not a global price on carbon? What could help incentivize their behavior to move more quickly towards this?
Just to be clear, a value on carbon reduction is a key starting point, and the Institute very much supports that. However, at the Institute, we are agnostic about how this is done. And there will be, as they say, horses for courses, different countries preferring different approaches to putting a value on carbon. And depending on the investment community, their tax structure, etc. So, for example, when we look at the US, we see a tax credit called 45Q that's put on CO2 reductions through CCS. When we look at Norway, we see a carbon tax, and of course, when we look at EU, we have the EU ETS carbon price through the trading mechanism. So there are different ways of putting a value on carbon, and we think that it's a must. However, at the Institute, we are, as I said, we are indifferent to we don't have a preferred way of doing that. However, we also think that whilst putting a value on carbon is necessary as a starting point, it's not sufficient on its own. Obviously, that's one externality, that's one market failure, but there are others. And we believe that clear and predictable supportive policy from governments is key to reduce sort of perceived risks to bring about investment, to create that trust from both sponsors, project sponsors, as well as from the finance community. And of course, potentially government coordination and investment, particularly in early stages of CCS development, is going to be quite important in order to scale up deployment of CCS.
Yeah, and I suppose the other kind of lever to pull, push, whatever, is the carbon market as well. Is I know there's interest from industrials about, okay, so if we spend the money and we jump on this kind of highway of going through our pilots and getting things to scale and rolling it out and we're spending on it, what is the prospect for real value in what we're extracting at the end of that? And of course, there are already many use cases and great stories about that. But does the Institute have a view on how that, I don't know, I guess, yeah, do you have a view on that?
Well, again, public procurement can kind of work really well in certain ways. For example, we talked about cement, sort of, low carbon. How does one create sort of a market for low carbon cement? It's interesting that I think decarbonized cement costs adds 1 to 2% to the cost of a building, if I remember correctly, from my stats. But actually, it increases the cost per kilo or ton of cement quite significantly. I think some 50% or so. So clearly, it's a difficult one for cement companies to put forward. But public procurement, kind of governments are big buyers of cement and steel and other kind of key materials. So this can certainly kind of create at least kickstart the creation of a market. Again, sort of certificates of low carbon, for example, could be a way of doing it. So there could be, as you said, carrots or sticks. So smart regulation, government purchasing could be potential kind of options to take forward.
Well, Guloran, thank you so much for giving me some time today. I'm going to give a minor shameless plug for the fact that you're leading our panel on CCUS commercialisation at our festival in January. Thank you so much for putting your hand up to do that, or rather saying yes as I twisted your arm to do that. But we'll be very happy to have you there. And yes, again, thank you very much for joining me today.
It is my pleasure, Alex. Thank you, and look forward to our session in the coming weeks.